Welcome to People in Profit, where we look at how business shapes our world. I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up, whispers of Grexit return to Athens as Greece's international lenders bicker over the bailout. We're asking if there's a real risk of a fresh crisis. As Donald Trump cracks down on immigration, we look at how American companies are stepping up efforts to support migrants and refugees. And from protests to innovations, how Parisian taxi drivers are trying to beat Uber at their own game. First up, though, it's a word that hasn't been heard for a while in Athens, but the spectre of a Grexit, or Greece leaving the Eurozone, has been raised yet again. A leaked memo from the International Monetary Fund says the country's debt could become explosive unless its EU creditors give Greece substantial help. Talks between the Greek government and its European lenders are deadlocked on issues of budget targets and economic reforms. The IMF, meanwhile, is still undecided about its role in the bailout. If it pulls out, the whole funding plan could collapse. Alexander Hurst has more.
It's the crisis that seemingly never ends, and now it's headed for an impasse.
There are also a number of member states that have been adamant about the IMF's involvement regarding this program, so that is not negotiable at this point.
But the IMF says that Greece's debt is unsustainable and wants the EU to include debt relief for the economically stricken nation as a condition for its participation in the €86 billion bailout fund agreed to in 2015. When the crisis began in 2009, Greek debt was 127% of GDP. It's now worth a whopping 182% of the Greek economy. Part of the blame, say the IMF and influential economists, lies with austerity. Every euro in cuts resulted in more than a euro in economic contraction, worsening the debt crisis even as government spending was slashed. At the same time, as a member of the Eurozone, there was no way for Greece to allow its currency to fall in value and cushion the blow by making its exports cheaper. As it has previously, the IMF is calling for Greece to tackle tax evasion and strengthen the health of its banks, and for the Eurozone to extend grace periods and maturity dates on loans, and for outright debt relief, which is politically problematic for many Eurozone members. The Greek economy has shrunk by 25% since the crisis began, and its 20% unemployment rate is the highest in the Eurozone.
For more on this story, let's speak to Jens Bastian, who's an economic advisor to the analysis service Macropolis, based in Athens. Jens, thanks for being with us. You've described this IMF memo as a watershed moment. Why is that?
Because in many ways, the IMF, with that data that it presented, the debt sustainability analysis, it didn't mince its words. For the first time, the IMF has said Greece's debt is highly unsustainable, and we cannot expect that Greece can even grow out of that debt. That's a new language, that's a new emphasis on what the IMF considers absolutely necessary and urgent to start talks with the European creditors about debt relief for Greece.
How optimistic are you that those calls from the IMF will be heard in Brussels, in Frankfurt and elsewhere in Europe?
At present, not very optimistic, because it is a call that the IMF has made in the course of the past 2 years. That's not news that it is now on the agenda, but it now comes with a new sense of urgency. And the IMF makes it conditional to participate also financially in the third program only on the basis if in return it also receives assurances from the European side about medium to long-term debt relief for Greece.
Are we running a real risk now that the IMF could just say, no thank you, we're not taking part in this bailout?
Yes, that risk is very clearly visible. It has in many ways also been articulated by the IMF, and it is, in my view, the biggest problem that the German finance minister Wolfgang Schäuble currently has. How do I keep the IMF on board?
So what does it mean if the IMF says they won't participate in this bailout? What does that mean for Greece?
In many ways, if it doesn't participate, it first of all means that the basis for which the third program was negotiated and signed by the Greek authorities is not valid anymore, because it was always done on the condition that the IMF participates in that program, and not only as a technical expert, also as a financial contributor to that program. Hence, in many ways, you have to renegotiate the terms of reference.
You've mentioned in previous writings that there are whispers of Grexit back on the scene. Is that something you think there's a real possibility of?
I don't see it currently as a real possibility. But given the experience we have had with the debate about Grexit in 2015, it is something that can always come back on the agenda. And at times I notice that representatives from Syriza, for example, MPs in the Greek parliament, are again toying with the idea of the parliament debating the merits of returning to the Greek drachma.
Give us an idea what the situation is like economically in Greece at the moment. We're talking about a battle that's being fought outside of the country, but what's the situation like where you are?
The situation in many ways presents itself that Greece is at a crossroads. There are tentative signs of an economic recovery. The fiscal adjustment is impressive. The current account deficit has declined. Parts of the economy are growing in the second and third quarter. So there are some green shots. At the same time, unemployment remains massive. There is a demand but low supply regarding public investment. And we still have a huge pile of non-performing loans. So in many ways, it's a debate about is the glass half full or half empty. But the level of political uncertainty, that is the key issue. For example, speculation about will Greece have early elections. It's the last thing that this country, that this electorate needs right now.
What's your prognosis then for where will we be in a year's time? Will Greece be exiting that bailout and looking towards a brighter future?
Stefan, in many ways it's difficult to look at Greece in a year's time. I would be more comfortable to look at it, where do we stand in the summer? Can we conclude in the coming weeks the second review of the third program? That's a matter of urgency. Can Greece then enter into the QE program of the European Central Bank? Can it prepare the ground, for example, to test investors' interest to place Greek bonds again on international capital markets? If that kind of work is a success, then we can look at a possibility of Greece exiting on time and in an orderly fashion the program that expires in July of next year.
Well, plenty to watch for in the coming weeks. Jens Bastian from Macropolis in Athens, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, turning next to the United States, Donald Trump's moves to restrict immigration have provoked outrage from many of America's biggest companies. Protests sprung up at airports around the United States against an executive order stopping people from 7 Muslim-majority countries from entering the United States. Firms like Google, Amazon and Apple have also spoken out against the ban and the president's move to suspend the US refugee program. Now, American companies have taken concrete steps in this area as well. William Hildebrandt's here with more. Will.
Stephen, we've seen a lot of reaction so far. Starbucks announcing that it will hire 10,000 refugees over the next 5 years in 75 countries. Now, Google has created a $4 million crisis fund, the money going to help organizations that work with minorities, immigrants, and refugees. Uber has also set up a fund to help affected employees, while Airbnb said it would provide free housing to people stranded because of the travel ban. This is far from the first time the corporate world has stepped up to help refugees. Notably, Barack Obama made a so-called call to action last year. That saw 51 companies pledge $650 million, money directed towards offering education, jobs, and financial services to more than 6 million refugees in more than 20 countries. And there are many other programs as well, such as Microsoft and others providing educational opportunities. Accenture is setting up job placements, and Johnson & Johnson is looking after children's health care. Now let's pass from refugees to economic migrants. There are fears that there are more immigration changes on the way, including reforms on the H-1B work visa. That's currently capped at 65,000 permits per year. And tech companies often use this visa to recruit talent abroad. 85% of them, in fact, go to Indians. And India has already voiced concern that U.S. reforms could have a knock-on effect on India's IT sector. More and more companies are defending diversity, and the American economy relies on foreign talent. Just consider the fact that more than half of the billion-dollar startups in the U.S. were founded by immigrants. Stephen?
Food for thought indeed, Will. Thank you very much. Next, Paris's taxi drivers have, through many months of protests, made their feelings very clear about Uber's ride-hailing service. Like in other European cities, they're unhappy about the competition from thousands of new cars on the streets. But now many taxi drivers are looking to new technology to regain their competitive edge. Clement Bonnereau has the story.
David Bowers started his own taxi business 4 years ago, but little did he know that he would face such fierce competition from Uber. With 30% more vehicles in Paris, but still the same number of customers, his earnings have dropped.
They're hiring all those self-employed chauffeurs who are destroying our jobs. I've been earning next to nothing for months. I pay myself less than €1,000 a month. You can hardly call that a decent salary, especially for someone who works 80 hours a week.
Here at the taxi trade show in Paris, Uber is enemy number one. But everyone admits that the American company has brought about much-needed change to the industry.
Uber's been beneficial to our profession. We were on our way to modernizing anyway, but it helped speed things up.
In a bid to rival Uber, taxi companies have developed their own apps. Customers can now use their smartphone's location service to find the nearest available taxi.
The advantage is that you see it straight away. You see it move on the map. So you only leave the restaurant or your home once the taxi's arrived. You don't have to wait outside. You don't have to hail it on the street.
The new service provides customers with an estimate of the final fare and allows them to pay directly from the app. However, some say it won't be enough to make sure taxis survive Uber.
That's it for this People in Profit. If you'd like to get in touch with your comments on any of the stories we've been covering, find us on Facebook at France 24 Business, or you can tweet me at NewStephen. Until next time, thanks for watching.